It's on screen.
This is responses from Calvinists or otherwise Reformation people from the time, and their responses to the execution of Michael Servetus.
Oh, boy.
So some of these you might have heard of, like Theodore Beza.
Yeah.
So he says, for punishment was most deservedly inflicted on Servetus at Geneva, not because he was a secretary, but a monstrous compound of mere impiety and horrid blasphemy, with which he had the whole period of time polluted. So, yeah, there you go. Cool to murder people. John Knox. Well-written name. Well, that God hath appointed death by law without mercy to be executed upon the blasphemers is evident by Leviticus 24. Look at these.
We're not under the law.
Still under the law.
My goodness.
These are the greats. Henry Bollinger. I know that many have wished you had not defended this principle. Many also thanks you, and among others of our church. And he's just given, let's see, it's not so many pious men who think the same and consider that such offenders ought not to only be silenced, but to be put to death. Do not repent, therefore. Who else we got here? I know Francis Turretin is in here somewhere. Melanchthon is like, oh yeah, that's funny because we have their correspondence together. That also that your magistrates did right in punishing after regular trial this blasphemous man. Peter Martyr Vermigli. Nothing to say of him except he was the very son of the devil, whose pestilential, frightful doctrine should be everywhere hunted down. See that the magistrate condemned him to death is not to be blamed, seeing that he gave no sign of improvement, and that his blasphemies were beyond endurance.
Wow. I mean, okay, even if he was as blasphemous and terrible as they said, where did Christ give us command, or any of the apostles, to, kill heretics?
No, not once.
Right. Love your
enemies. Do good to them.
If you follow the way that these, again, like the merging of the church and the state, for example.
Yes.
And then the considering that your state, or any state of a Christian king, now you have the same authority as any Christian. Because again, if you consider yourself just a new extension of the Bible, everything in the Bible is already done. Revelation's done. That doesn't mean all that stuff that meant the old Roman Empire. The beast and the Antichrist was Nero. So everything new is just new. We're all making it up as we go along now. So it's all good. Now we're making new rules. Zwingli, wasn't he himself Arian? Teachings of Servetus. John Calvin.
Zwingli was accused of being a Pelagian by someone. I can't remember whether it was Calvin or Luther that accused him of being Pelagian. So in some ways, Zwingli was actually closer to our position than to Calvin. But he still approved.
Here's Calvin. Whosoever shall now contend that it unjust to put heretics and blasphemers to death will knowingly and willingly incur their very guilt. This is not laid down on human authority. It is God who speaks and prescribes a perpetual rule for his church. It is not in vain that he banishes all these human affections which soften our hearts, that he commands paternal love and all benevolent feelings between brothers, relations, friends to cease. In a word, he almost deprives men of their nature in order that nothing may hinder their holy zeal. Deprives men of their nature. So you're no longer to be a human.
Calvin thinks he's speaking on behalf of God.
Yeah, Calvin thinks he's God.
Wow, that man. He was quite the narcissist.
Yeah.
Why is so implacable a severity exacted that we may know that God is defrauded of his honor, unless the piety that is due to him be preferred to all human duties, that when his glory is to be asserted. I can see why people like reading him. He's very verbose. Humanity must be almost obliterated from our memory. Commenting on his quotation, Schaff, blah, 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 Philip Schaff. Let's continue. There's the way this is. John Owen, the height of blasphemy of Satan wrought up. I mean, are these guys? This is mind blowing. It's absolutely mind blowing. These guys. There's Francis Turretin. You know, I know Kevin, you Turretin fan. He's such a nice guy. Does he know that his hero is a murder apologist? It's not simple heresy, lying concealed in the heart about one another head of faith. Complicated heresy. The basis of heresy actually. Let's see. Nothing was done here rashly and precipitously by the magistrate, but all the circumstances were maturely weighed in the fear of God, and not without consultation also of the more distinguished chiefs of reformed Switzerland, who acknowledged the equity of the judgment and approved it by their votes.
That's a complete load of garbage, because Calvin determined that Servetus should die if he came to. Calvin had already said that, and if anybody went against Calvin, he would destroy them. So Calvin had already determined it before there was any trial, before he came to Geneva. So this is
Calvin
a load of garbage.
If Michael Servetus comes here, he will not leave alive. Calvin said that.
Yep.
Before he even showed up.
See, Bucher judged that, quote, he deserved to be torn asunder. Melanchthon affirms that the Genevan magistrates did right for killing this blasphemer after regular trial. When Grotius, however, endeavors to throw the whole blame of this punishment upon Calvin, calling him with scurrility the burner of Servetus, he boldly calumniates him against the faith of the whole history and testimony of all writers who assert that Calvin did what it was his duty, that he might be convinced of his unnatural and dreadful heresy. This is all written by Francis Turretin. Calvin did what his duty to do, and that he might be convinced of this unnatural and dreadful heresy and return from his pestiferous error and bring forth better fruit. But that he prompted the magistrate to burn him, neither do they anywhere say, nor is confirmed of any proof, nor is it evident that with the College of Passery tried to dissuade them from this kind of punishment. But the magistrate was horrified at so many blasphemies and did not wish to deal with him mildly. But who wonders at the punishment of the devoted head which is deserved upon the standard bearers of impious sect displeased this?
So how were they trying to persuade him? By torturing him, by threatening him? Where do we see that in the New Testament? Oh, that's right, only in the Old Testament, which even then they're twisting it, pretending that they're Israel. So behaving like Roman Catholics, replacement theology. We're not Israel, not in that sense. We're spiritual Israel. We're not earthly Israel. Ridiculous.
You know, it's interesting, though, to me that even the fact that this thing happened seemed to actually be something that was like, whoa, what are we doing here? You know, like at least some people seem to be saying that. Otherwise, these guys wouldn't have bothered writing anything about it, right?
Yeah, there were people questioning it, obviously. But those people were probably killed and burned at the stake as well.
Shit. And when I see the way people treat each other now, I mean, whatever, you talk about over the internet. I mean, the internet is that's society now. Like, I have no doubt that people would get to that point very quickly today.
Yeah. Well, people would love to burn me at the stake if they could.
Luther believed in the Anabaptist practice of, quote, every member functioning in the church, quote, was from the pit of hell, end quote. Within 2 decades, hundreds of laws were passed making this Anabaptist heresy a capital offense. As a result, many Bible-believing Christians were burned to death for their convictions with Luther's encouragement and his blessing. In Geneva, where Calvin ruled, a child was literally beheaded for striking his parents, and his own stepdaughter and son-in-law were executed for adultery. Jacques Scroot.
Wow, how holy they are. Wow. What great pinnacle standards of Christian excellence are these first-generation reformers. What outstanding men of God.
Dared to disagree with Calvin, calling him, quote, ambitious and a haughty hypocrite. Calvin ordered Groot to be nailed to a stake by his feet, where he was tortured until eventually beheaded for, quote, blasphemy and rebellion.
Wow, how dare you speak out against John Calvin, or he'll have you crucified and beheaded. Wow. What a holy, righteous man of God John Calvin was. Wow, thank God for John Calvin. What an excellent example for the church.
friend of Calvin, Sabio Castillo, rebuked his intolerance and cruelty, saying in part, quote, if Christ himself came to Geneva, he would be crucified, for Geneva is not a place of Christian liberty. It is ruled by a new pope, John Calvin, but one who burns men alive while the pope at Rome strangles them first, end quote. In contrast, lesser-known leaders like Balthasar Hubmaier laid the foundation for the Reformation while standing for Christian liberty, believers' baptism, and many of the Christ-like values we hold to today. Before the rise of Luther or Calvin or Hubmaier and others like him took on the basis of Catholic Church, the abuses, of the Catholic Church, while defending even the atheist right to live in peace. While Luther, Calvin, and Zwingli, and many other reformers who left Catholicism continue to rely on state powers for the execution of, quote, heretics, men like Hubmaier stood for Christian love and respect, even for his enemies.
So I have to know, like, if anyone in the chat, I have to know this, right? So if there's any, Calvinists in the chat that defend Luther and Calvin for this kind of stuff, where in the New Testament are Christians commanded to kill heretics, to burn them, strangle them, torture them to death, behead them? Like, where is this taught in the New Testament? Didn't Jesus teach us to love our enemies as ourselves, love our neighbors? Where is this justified murdering of quote-unquote heretics? Where? This is disgusting.
Which to me sounds a lot like Jesus. Hubmaier was a popular preacher in his day and is said to have baptized around 6,000 persons in Nogensburg alone. Not long after enduring months of torture for teaching believers baptism under the rule of Ulrich Zwingli, Hubmaier and his wife.
He endured months of torture for teaching believers baptism. Wow, you hear that, guys? He was tortured for months for teaching that baptism is only for believers. Wow. What great man of God did this to him. Wow. Whoa, bow down at the shrine and altar of John Calvin. What a great godly man he was. Wow.
Were arrested by authorities and tried for heresy. On March 10th, 1528, he was burned alive. Why don't we celebrate this man? I don't understand why we as Baptists don't have Hubmaier is my homeboy on our t-shirts. Like the Calvinists have Calvin is my homeboy all over their t-shirt. Why don't people even know who Hubmaier is? 3 days later, his wife was tossed into a river with a large stone tied around her neck. Horrible. These are our ancestors. These are the people who Baptist roots. These people are stood for Christian liberty. Hubmaier taught a non-Calvinistic soteriology. He believed it was by the means of the gospel that God takes the initiative in drawing all people to himself. As the gospel is proclaimed, God's Spirit convicts human hearts and leads them to confess Christ. While God takes the initiative, he does not make the decision for man. By his attracting and drawing will, God wills and draws all men to salvation. This is Hubmaier teaching. Yet the choice is still left to man, since God wants him without pressure, unconstrained, under no compulsion. According to Hubmaier's own testimony, his belief that God genuinely loved and desired the salvation of all his enemies influenced his views on religious liberty. He argued, quote, a heretic is not convinced by our act, either with the sword or with fire, but only with patience and prayer. Do you hear that? Because he had a good sound soteriology of God's love and provision for all people, he didn't want to burn people at the stake. He didn't want to convince them with sword or fire. He wanted to convince them with patience and prayer because he actually believed that Christ died for all people and that they are valued, that all people matter. That's why he stood for Christian liberty. That's Baptist.